So why are so many influencers starting to post stuff on Instagram about the glucose levels? You might have seen the pictures and I got very curious. What is it that I can actually do and why is the glucose level so important? With many of my guests, we often talk about keeping a stable blood sugar. And I was like, but what does that actually mean? So to figure that out, I got a rockstar entrepreneur who is the co-founder of something called Veri. We'll get more into that, but he is an expert on this and have seen a lot of data. It is Verneri Jaamuru, with my best Finnish accent. Verneri, welcome so much for the podcast.
Hey, thanks for having me.
So before we dive into this glucose monitoring, CGMs and so on, tell me about how did you get into health? And why did you end up looking at this biomarker?
Yeah. My journey has really come from a place of like personal need. So growing up, I had a few different autoimmune conditions that really kind of set me back in a lot of ways. And so growing up, I had a really tough relationship with food. There'd be periods where I wouldn't be able to eat at all, and that kind of has led me down this path of just trying to better understand the relationship between food and how we feel. And they're really like, if you think about it, food is not being quantified, past just calories in, calories out. And fortunately, like we're understanding a lot more about the nuance of food and realizing that calories in, calories out is a gross oversimplification. And so what we do with Veri and what kind of has led us down this path is just getting deeper into the nuance of understanding how food is impacting your body, and then ultimately like how that's affecting your mental state, how much energy you have, and really how good you feel.
That's fascinating. So I had the pleasure of testing this out for the ones who went the video. It's a small thing that you put into your shoulder, and then it measures your glucose levels. But before we go further, what is a glucose level? What does that actually mean?
Yeah. So glucose is the primary fuel of the body. So if you think about, a human being, like where do you get your energy to live and to breathe and to move and to do everything that you're doing? Well, it all comes from something that you put in your mouth at some point or another. And so your body, the moment that you actually, even before you actually eat the food, as like when you present the food in front of your face, your body already triggers the metabolic process. Enzymes start excreting in your mouth, and your body's like kind of preparing for the digestion of that food. But ultimately, like, your body metabolizes that food into glucose and different forms of fat. But glucose is the primary fuel. And what Veri does is Veri tracks the levels of glucose in your blood so that you can see how the different foods that you're eating are impacting the levels of glucose in the blood. And then ultimately, like the cool thing is you'll start to notice some patterns there after a while.
That's definitely what I saw as well. So just staying a little bit here, like, so why is it important, like whether glucose levels spike a lot? And what should we be looking for? Like this has been done for people that are diabetic for so many years, right? And now we are starting to put it on healthy people as well because, yeah, it has an impact for us as well. But can you go a little bit more into like what's the reasons behind it?
Yeah. So a lot of the science hasn't really yet been done. So we don't actually know definitively, what is normal in terms of blood sugar or not. A lot of the research has been done in diabetic populations, but not in the quote unquote like healthy population. But what we do know is we can reflect on anthropology and evolution, and there's some really interesting studies they've done where they've looked at people in hunter-gatherer tribes and tracked their glucose, and their glucose is pretty much level. And so the way that we think about it, and a lot of people in research are kind of approaching it now, is thinking about the human body as a system. And like any system, the point is equilibrium. and glucose is one part of that picture. And so it makes sense that it would, to perform better, you want to keep your glucose as steady as possible. And it just kind of allows that metabolic machinery to run a little bit more efficiently. And so I guess the simplest way to explain it is that whenever you do eat something that causes really high spikes in glucose, it does kind of shock the body a little bit. The body has to work just a little bit harder, and it just stresses that metabolic machinery.
Interesting. I also read that I saw where there's a lot of studies, as you're saying, like a lot of the science is coming out on how does it actually react with, or how does it affect people that are non-diabetic, right? But that we want ideally to have these spikes to like drop down quite fast again. That it might not be a big problem that we have the spikes that might be normal with different food, but that we at least want to even out a bit faster. But it's fascinating how this is coming out, and then also like trying to feel how you are feeling. Something else that really, why I'm really a big fan of like nature first and then technology second. But there's not everything that we can get from nature, right? And what I find extremely fascinating was there was a study done, I think it was in North Korea, with a bunch of men there where they looked at like a glucose index for different food. And it turned out, some people look at that like a banana will affect you this much, but it's actually individual, and there's so many factors going in. Like my buddy Nikolai Damsgaard, who is also one of the leading biohackers in Denmark, he tested as well, and he found out that it was actually stress and sleep had a bigger impact on his glucose levels than the stuff that he was eating. So that's say kind of a new way of actually looking at it compared to how we've been speaking about it earlier, right?
Absolutely, yeah. Like I mean, this changes really the way that we think about food, because it's so much more than just what you're eating. It's also like how you're eating. Some things that we've seen in our data is that the timing, like the same meal eaten at different times of the day, your body digests it completely differently. And the backside of that is like, are you eating in a way that's aligned with your circadian rhythm, right? So there's a lot of like nuance when it comes to food, and it's more than just what you're eating, which is pretty cool.
It's so fascinating that you can actually get that data now and start to look into understanding that better. One thing that I discovered as well when I was playing around with was that if I eat fats and proteins first, that seems to be a lower impact on my glucose levels. Do we know anything about that, or I find it fascinating, all these, like you always told as a kid, or I was, eat your dessert in the end, right? So like some of these things like ancestral wisdom and so on, like seems to be the thing. And I discussed it with a friend as well that explained, I think it was in Chinese culture or somewhere else in Asia, that they will eat the rice in the end, but they will first have the protein. I think in Italy as well.
Yeah, that's I've seen the same thing. It's like it's crazy now that I'm like attuned to this. It just keeps popping up. But I had a similar thing where a Korean friend was sharing with me that always you'd eat the meat first and the rice second. And that's one thing that you'll very clearly be able to see in the data is whenever you front load your meals with meat or with some source of healthy fat and protein, the way that your body just metabolizes that meal is a lot different.
It's good knowledge to know. So I tested, I was in the Dominican Republic, and in the name of science, of course, I had to try to eat different kind of fruit. And I tried a brownie before and a brownie after, like a lunch. And there was definitely a higher spike. So I think that's pretty interesting, actually. Often, like one thing is that we can have all these gadgets, but like how can it actually change our life, right? And does it give us actionable insight? I think it's quite interesting that you can see here, like how can you potentially eat the same stuff, but you eat it in a smarter way, in a different order, and it'll have a better impact on your body. I think that.
Yeah, that's right.
That's so.
There's like the opportunity to have your cake and eat it too. I mean, even like small things like taking a 10-minute walk after a meal. It's crazy how big of an impact that has. Another thing that we've seen is if you work out, on a day that you work out, or if you worked out the day before, there will be like carryover effects into the next 24 or 48 hours, where you'll be able to see that, hey, your body is just that much more receptive to the nutrition that you're eating. and your glucose ends up being a little bit more stable.
So I heard the thing as well before that doing a walk right after, I think it was in a Ben Greenfield podcast episode where he talked about do some kind of movement, just a small walk right after will level out your glucose levels and generally just be better for your digestion. Do you know about any like studies or any results that you have seen, like how long to walk or like what kind of exercise and so on that's most beneficial? Or do we just know like some kind of movement is good?
In general, any sort of movement is good. I haven't come across any specific studies like on the walking. Granted, there's like another interesting thing that you can see from glucose is the difference between aerobic and anaerobic exercise.
And just a word on the difference on the two, if someone is listening, being like, though, like, what does that mean?
Yeah. So aerobic being that your heart rate is generally lower. And what you'll see in the glucose is that the glucose will stay pretty flat, maybe trend slightly downwards. And then when you get into anaerobic, so a little bit more high intensity, your heart rate is a lot more elevated. Your body starts to consume a lot more glucose, and to kind of compensate, then your liver and your muscles release glucose, and you'll be able to see that in the data as somewhat of a spike. A lot of people may freak out when they see that, but in that context, you actually want that. That's a good thing.
Yeah, that makes sense. So what's the future for glucose monitoring? Because probably to say, I used your app and it was evolving just the 14 days that I have it. You also just raised another big funding round, so a lot of stuff is happening with the company. But I found it very fascinating, like the second update where suddenly I got a score for the different kind of food that I ate, like how well I was actually recovering from it.
Yeah. There's a lot of different directions that technology with glucose can go. For us, like we're really interested in the food aspect of it. So we see like food as being the primary pillar of metabolic health. And so what we're trying to do is just give more granular, more nuanced insight about what you're eating. So some things that we're working on is like having food tags. So you can, instead of understanding that, hey, meal A is better than meal B, we can dive into the details and tell you that, hey, meal A is better specifically because of this ingredient and this ingredient. And over time, we can get to a point where we can start, recommending you different food ingredient combinations and all sorts of pretty cool things there.
Cool. Another thing I often like when I look at gadgets or technology and tests and so on, how accurate is this? Like, what kind of validation do we have that like the results that we're seeing are actually true?
Yeah. The devices that we use Abbott's Freestyle Libre. So the hardware has been actually developed for type 1 diabetics. And so the accuracy is enough to where a type 1 diabetics use it to dose their insulin. And so that's actually pretty careful. You have to be pretty careful there, because if you dose too much insulin, you end up dying. So the accuracy is there, but there is some discrepancy there in some like ranges. And generally what we've seen is that more than the absolute value of the glucose that you have, it's more insightful to be paying attention to the trend. So what direction is it moving? How quickly is it increasing, or how quickly is it decreasing?
Yeah. I guess we should probably also tell the listeners the way that it works is, for the one seeing it, there's this little device. It goes into to your arm. A pro tip: don't do like me and put it into your triceps. That hurts. You need to get it around where like it's not the muscle. I think I'm right in that, right?
Yeah.
And then it's a bit more soft. And then you simply just take your phone up and scan, and then you get the result. And you wear it for 14 days, right? Yeah,
that's right. So each sensor is disposable and has a 14-day lifetime. And it's best to just apply it to like the fattiest part of the back of the upper arm.
And that's hard when you are so toned.
Yeah. Harder for some folks.
Yeah. but that makes sense. I had some other friends that tried it out. It's a thing that several of the people here in the Copenhagen biohack environment has tested. And I know most people think it's quite interesting because it is giving more of those actionable insights, even though I think like microbiome tests, we are still in a stage where we need to get more data and do more studies. But I guess, are you doing any studies with universities and so on trying to validate more of like healthy individuals, or that's like long out in the pipeline?
Yeah, great question. That's something that we're really, really excited about. We've contributed our data to a few different studies. One out of Harvard. I don't think they've published that one yet, but we actually brought on a director of health last fall onto our team to start thinking through just validating more of the data that we're seeing and trying to make sense of it. But our long-term vision is that we'd be able to actually open up the data that we're seeing and collecting to universities and to different research partners. I think hopefully, not too long into the future, we'll have a pretty novel data set where we're actually linking an objective biomarker, glucose, from your body and the things that people are eating at scale. So I think glucose, this whole space in general, I think we're going to start seeing a lot more interesting, nutrition and food related science coming out in the coming 3 years.
That would be great, because too much of like the science that we have around eating and so on is so inaccurate, right? People are reporting themselves with the eating, which is often wrong. And that stuff, like I know several people that look into research, it's absolutely garbage. Where here, if you actually take pictures of the food as well as you can do in the app, and you can relate it. That would lead to another question that I know many people have about privacy. So I personally think this kind of data is I don't have a problem sharing this kind of data. I don't want to share my DNA data because that's more traceable, even though someone that knows about machine learning, all that stuff, would tell me that I'm naive, that you can trace more things with a bit of data. But like, how does that work?
Yeah. Well, right now we actually don't collect the data. All the data is stored locally on the phone. But once we get a little bit further on, we'd be following the standard best practices. So all the data is completely anonymized, and essentially we just see it in the aggregate. So we just see the collection of, okay, how is glucose in the Veri population responding to this food ingredient or this food ingredient.
That makes sense. So what are some of the other cool things that we haven't talked about that you can learn from a glucose monitor, or just without having a glucose monitor, just understanding about your blood sugar?
Yeah, I think stress is a really cool one that is often overlooked or not really discussed. But I've had a few cases where I've had more stressful meetings come up, and you just see a spike very clearly in the data. And I'm pretty excited about as the analysis of the data gets better, will we be able to actually sense your stress levels like over time? I think that's something that might be really promising down the line.
Yeah, that makes it. It's interesting how so many things are related to stress, and like how it like raises our glucose levels and so many other things, like the impact that the mental aspect has on the body. I think it seems more and more people are talking more about it. Same like, how is your stress levels compared to your food? That is not just eating food, is also like, how are your stress levels? I really look forward to seeing, when you've been working on this for a few years, if you can end up doing studies. I would be curious about that, like how people eat. Like, would it change if you sit and eat mindfully, as many people say that you need to digest the food instead of sitting with a phone and so on? But if you eat mindfully and you don't chew as fast, and you're just having a conversation with friends, for example. I know it's
right.
Those kind of studies are expensive, but like, I think with this kind of device and more data, we're starting to get more of this ancestral wisdom where people have been told like, do this and this, and where we might see more like how it actually makes a difference in the body.
Right. Yeah. It's all connected, and stress also, it's bidirectional, right? So if you're eating out of sync with your circadian rhythm, that can already like just cause stress. You don't sleep as well the next night, and the next day, your cortisol levels will be elevated. And then when they're elevated, you're not digesting the food as well as you would have.
Yeah.
And so it's like it's all connected, and I think the deeper we go down the rabbit hole and just start actually being able to objectively measure what's going on, the closer we can get to finding the truth, so to say.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. So changing gear a little bit, what do you do to stay healthy and on top of things now? Like, you're running a startup that is very stressful for most people. You just managed to raise a new round and so on. So like, how do you balance this life?
Yeah, great question. For me, it's good nutrition. So, but also not neurotic nutrition. So I'm not the type to be, super strict. I definitely understand and appreciate the value of soul food, so to say. Food is a lot more than just the physical. It's also like a connection. It's a very social thing. But I eat meat based, so primarily meats, and then I add in different fruits and vegetables into the mix. But the general rule that I follow with food is just as unprocessed as possible. So just eating food that is as close to what I could find from nature as possible. And then in terms of meal timing, I generally go for 1 or 2 meals per day. I weight those towards the morning hours of the day. I found that is just like much more effective for my energy levels.
So you eat breakfast and then a lunch, or how?
Yeah. So a pretty sizable breakfast, and then a lunch, or some days I'll just eat a lunch and then, be good with that. And then prioritizing sleep. That's one that I'm, struggle with, but working on. But sleep is definitely important. And, that's one that, like, now that I've gotten, having worn the sensor for like a few years now, I'm starting to now just appreciate like how much sleep actually also affects my glucose levels. So sleeping well is probably the second, pillar for me. And then thirdly, I guess the stress that you mentioned, that's not always easy to manage, but I found just random walks sprinkled throughout my day to be really, really helpful. I think there might be something even evolutionarily to say about that. I've been really passionate about just reflecting like human health onto evolution. And I think evolutionary humans probably spent a lot of time just walking around and, horizontally just scoping the landscape. So I think walks kind of just center you and bring you back to that calm state.
I like that. Who do you get inspired by? Like, who do you follow for learning new things within the health space and so on?
Oh, that's a good question. It depends on the season. I think depending on different times of the year, I'll dive deeper onto different topics and different people. But I don't know if there's any specific names I'd drop right now. I've been really interested in biomechanics lately, and foot health, and how the shoes that we wear affect our posture, and how posture affects your breathing rate, and how that affects your nervous system. So that's kind of one area that I'm pretty excited about.
That is definitely interesting as well. And what's something I often talk about with my guests as well is like being grateful for the small things, which has a big effect on stress. What's one thing that you're grateful for these days?
I'd say our team that we have, like, I don't know how, but we've succeeded in just bringing really fantastic people on this journey with us building this product. And it's been amazing to see how different people bring different flavors and different perspectives into the mix.
Fantastic.
Definitely grateful for our team.
I love that. And you're looking for more team members now, right?
Yeah, that's right. So we have more resources now, and now it's just about finding the right people to help contribute to this mission. So we're recruiting on pretty much all fronts across product marketing, customer support, operations, you name it.
That is a good journey. I'll make sure to link to that in the show note as well. So if you've been listening and thinking like, this sounds kind of cool to be able to get in at a startup that is doing something that can change lives, then there's definitely positions. And I'm sure you're going to continue to be recruiting because, yeah, that's how it is when you are scaling, right?
Absolutely.
Is there anything that we didn't get around that would be good to have mentioned today for the listeners that you think is important for them to know?
Nothing comes to mind. Do you have anything?
I think we're getting around a lot of good stuff. So where can people find out more about you? Someone's like, this sounds interesting. Where can I follow this dude?
The best place is www.veristable.com, and Veri is with an I. I guess a little fun fact there is that Veri is actually the word for blood in Finnish.
So Blood Stable is the name.
Yes, yeah, that's right.
That makes a lot of sense. Do you share on social media personally as well, or do you keep that more like the private part, and then full focus on the company? And full respect for people that are doing that, saying like, "Hey, I'm not going to do social media all the time." I think that's quite healthy.
Yeah. On Twitter, I post about like more work and what more stuff related to what we're building. So feel free to follow me on Twitter. It's Jaamuru. That's my last name. So it's Jaamuru.
I'll make sure to link to that. Verneri, I'm trying to say right. Thank you so much for coming on the show. I really appreciate it.
Hey, thank you. This was fun.